Action Park was an amusement park in New Jersey and one of the first modern American water parks that became legendary for its dangerous reputation. You see, a combination of factors, including design, lack of proper employee training, and reckless clientele, led to a consistently bad safety situation, exemplified by 4 guest deaths within 2 years. This is the story of Action Park, New Jersey, America's most dangerous amusement park. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Action Park first opened in 1978 in Vernon Valley, New Jersey. A popular ski area in the wintertime, the CEO hoped to create a year-round location for the whole family to enjoy, with a significant focus on the park being as intense as the guest intended. Fully opening on 4th of July, that summer's attractions included 2 water slides, an Alpine slide, which is a kart ride following a slide down the mountain, a go-kart track, and several sports fields. Humble beginnings, but it expanded pretty quickly. So with that in mind, let's get a little context by taking a tour of the park in its peak. Action Park featured 3 major areas: the Alpine Center, Motor World, and Water World. The Alpine Center featured the Alpine slide, a bungee jumping tower, a skate park, and a monorail. There was also a ball track that did not pass inspection. You see, on its test run, the ball derailed as the track fell apart. It plummeted down the mountain, nearly hitting the safety inspector himself, after which it rolled through the parking lot, crossed the highway, and plunged into a swamp. Amazingly, the rider was mostly unharmed, and the ball miraculously didn't hit any cars on the highway. But after witnessing this travesty, the inspector left without saying a word. Silence spoke volumes, and the ride was disposed of. Motor World originated with go-karts, and they expanded to include a small circular track, open cockpit race cars, and an attraction featuring miniature tanks equipped with tennis ball cannons. The area also featured 2 boat attractions and 2 aerial rides. These also had a myriad of issues that we will come back to later. Lastly, there was Water World, one of America's first modern water parks, and the park's most dangerous area. Waterworld featured the infamous Cannonball Loop, an enclosed body slide with a vertical loop, and a wave pool, which was perhaps more infamous. There were also a few other body and tube water slides, a single cabled swing, a mat slide, and a diving pool. This area also featured a tunnel called the Aerodrome, designed to simulate skydiving. Despite being operated by a separate company, this ride still had many accidents. Speaking of accidents, let's get into what went wrong. Starting with the Alpine Center and Alpine Slide, the oldest ride in the park. The first few years had occasional injuries, but 1980 saw disaster strike. You see, during a ride on July the 8th, George Larson Jr., a 19-year-old employee at a nearby park, was thrown from the ride when his car fell off the track. He fell 25 feet down an embankment and hit his head on a rock at the bottom. He was rushed to intensive care where he died on the 16th, never waking from his coma. The CEO at the time reported that the ride did not kill him, and oddly, the rock cleared them of any wrongdoing. They also reported to the press that he was an employee of Action Park, a lie intended to avoid having to report a customer's death to the state of New Jersey. The ride was made of fiberglass, and the cars featured handbrakes so people could attempt to control their own speed, fitting the park's founding vision. However, these brakes rarely worked as intended. They were either non-functional, so speed was uncontrollable altogether, or locked on entirely. And this was problematic as the cart crept along at a snail's pace until another car inevitably rear-ended it. This is to say nothing for the track itself, which did not often feature walls at its curves to prevent cars from falling out, hence the fatality. Hay bales were instead placed there in an attempt to catch wayward carts, which became an increasingly common occurrence. As time passed, the tracks became increasingly scratched and battered, so a laceration was practically guaranteed if any skin touched the walls. Any limbs caught out of the vehicle were also liable to be broken. The Alpine slide was the culprit for most of the incidents when the park was young. It was responsible for 26 serious head injuries and 14 fractures. At least those were the ones reported. While the Alpine slide was undoubtedly the heaviest hitter regarding injuries in the Alpine Center, that's not to say that the other locations were harmless. The skateboard park in particular had several dividing ridges made with pavement, separating bowls and causing countless injuries as riders snagged. According to one employee, the accidents were so numerous that the park buried the feature in dirt and pretended it never existed. Let's move on to Motor World, which also had its fair share of risks. The go-karts in the circular tracks did not function as intended. They had a maximum speed of 20 miles per hour, which was regulated by a type of governing device, but riders found out that if they stuffed a tennis ball into the device, it would be deactivated, more than doubling the go-kart's speed. Of course, this offered patrons and employees the unique opportunity to play bumper cars at 50 miles an hour, simulating a car crash with authentic car crash injuries. That wasn't the only issue with the super go-karts though, as they were poorly maintained. Their engines leaked gasoline fumes, forcing some riders to bail out as they drove. And then there was the tank ride. Now, despite it being designed based on actual machines of war, the tank ride was surprisingly safer for patrons. The tanks fired tennis balls at each other, and if they hit a sensor or another tank, that tank would stop functioning for a few moments. However, the employees disliked this position because if a tank broke down or got stuck, they had to enter the pit and often became subject to a hail of tank fire. Motor World's water attractions had super speedboats, but unlike their land counterparts, they could not be throttled past 40 miles per hour. This didn't stop riders from playing bumper boats with them, however, including one drunken rider who capsized and forced a lifeguard to pull him out. Additionally, the bumper boats leaked gasoline and were too small for tall riders, forcing them to hang limbs outside the ride, which would be promptly broken upon impact. And now we come to the infamous Water World, and let's start with the star player, the Cannonball Loop. This vertical loop horrified even the most die-hard water park enthusiasts, including the park employees. Allegedly, it was common for the administration to bribe test riders with hundreds of dollars, and it was still a poor deal. You see, people went down the Cannonball Loop feet first, but emerged head first, meaning injuries were more common than not. People should have never gone down this slide, as the test dummies got so beaten up that they were often dismembered by the ride. This attraction was only open for a month, and it managed to rack up so many bloody noses and back injuries that the advisory board on carnival amusement ride safety came down on it before the end of 1985. Another of the infamous structures at Action Park was the tidal wave pool, popularly known as the Grave Pool. This pool was 8 feet at its deepest, 250 feet long, 100 feet wide, and with a maximum capacity of 1,000 people. Wave pools generate waves using fans in large structures at the deepest part of the pool, which turns in sequence to churn the water and create waves. Now, most wave pools don't often run at maximum power, only using 1 or 2 fans for a few minutes. Now, Action Park took a far more brutalist approach, as its full-powered waves were 40 inches tall, and sessions lasted for 20 minutes with 10-minute breaks between. That level of powerful waves, with the combined long duration, could wear down even the most experienced swimmers. And here I might add that most of the patrons of Action Park were either inexperienced or outright couldn't swim. This was all made worse because the pool used fresh water, unlike other wave pools that frequently use a mix which allows people to be more buoyant, so people sank even more naturally than they typically would. Now sadly, this pool claimed a few lives: a 15-year-old in 1982, a 20-year-old in 1984, and an 18-year-old in 1987. These horrific numbers probably weren't due to a lack of effort on the lifeguards' end, as the team of 12 averaged 30 rescues a day on busier days. That's not normal, as a typical lifeguard can expect to rescue a tenth of that in a season. The grave pool was not the only attraction to kill someone in 1982. The kayak experience, benign as that might sound, which locked small kayaks into small tracks for people to paddle through, claimed the lives of a 27-year-old man. You see, he got out of his kayak to get it unstuck, and he got too close to an exposed live wire. The wire electrocuted him and forced him into cardiac arrest. He died on arrival at the hospital. Action Park couldn't talk themselves out of this one. The coroner's report cited the ride as cause of death, exclaiming that people don't get burned like that in safe water. Horrifyingly, a second person also died in 1984 on another ride in Waterworld. This was the Tarzan swing, a single wire swing allowing people to swing over an ice-cold body of water and the option to plunge into it. Terrible scrapes were commonplace from people swinging too close to the ground, and temperature shock was another issue for some who fell into the water. Falling into ice-cold water can seriously disorient someone to the point that they actually forget how to swim, but that didn't factor into the death. The death resulted from the rider falling into the water, and the temperature shock is believed to have triggered a heart attack, killing him. So that's a total of 6 deaths in 7 years, 4 of which happened within 2 years. Begging the question, why did these deaths happen so frequently? Well, just like so many things in history, there's rarely ever just one reason. Firstly, the designs of the rides were often confusingly incompetent, with the CEO's anything-goes mindset leading to many designers with no experience being brought on just for having a cool-sounding idea. The CEO also employed 5 children, one of whom, Andy, was the head lifeguard. It's also worth mentioning here that the majority of employees were teenagers. While other parks do have largely teenaged staff, the difference with Action Park was that teenagers led them. In contrast, others are led by older and more experienced staff that instill a sense of professionalism in them during their training. Contrast that to Action Park's minimal training and the employees acting just like the craziest guests that they oversaw. Action Park also attracted a particular audience who heard the horrifying news stories and were intrigued more than deterred. This volatile clientele, combined with the lax enforcement of the alcohol age and quantity limits, sounds less like a fun afternoon and more like a literal recipe for disaster. A local emergency room director reported in 1987 that Action Park was responsible for 5 to 10 of their visits every single day during peak season. In fact, they had to purchase extra ambulances to meet the demand. With all those factors, there's no way this park could continue as it was. Something had to give, or the place would fall apart. As it turns out, Action Park didn't get its situation together. The park's parent company filed for bankruptcy in 1996 and did not reopen for the 1997 season. Despite being incredibly dangerous, Action Park became a cultural icon for New Jerseyans, and getting seriously injured there became a sort of rite of passage for the kids of the 90s. And it's likely because of this reputation that it reopened in 2014, with drastically improved safety standards and new management. However, by 2016, the Action Park name was retired, consigning it to the pages of history. In total, Action Park's parent company received 2,400 lawsuits related to injury in the park. The former CEO allegedly took an aggressive approach to these suits, to never settle and only pay compensation if they lost the suit, an approach which was most likely a headache to the company's lawyers. Action Park's echoes reverberated throughout New Jersey and its nearby states. Anyone who lived in the region at the time can attest to the sheer amount of headlines coming out of the park, as it was constantly in the newspapers. People who went to Action Park sometimes speak of it as if they were war veterans discussing their shared trauma, psychological and physical. It defined the region to the point that some associated injuries from the park with their very heritage. Perhaps something you'd only find in the great state of New Jersey. And we'll leave it there for today, but if you'd like to see these episodes commercial-free, click join, and I'll see you in the members area. Until next time. This is Ryan Socash, signing off.